everybody, and a very warm welcome to the session with Luc Steels. And I must say that I am very, very honored to introduce to you Luc Steels, who is a fellow Belgian. And not only that, he is a very important person in artificial intelligence. And I'm very, very proud to have him here at our conference. I'm very honored that you are a part of this event. Professor Luc Steels is the founder of the Artificial Intelligence Lab at the Free University of Brussels, but he has since moved on and became a research professor in ICREA in Barcelona, where he works at the Pompeu Fabra University in the Institute of Evolutionary Biology. And for many years he has been the director also of the Sony laboratory in Paris, where he has been working in robotics and in artificial intelligence. And he is one of the founders of the European Artificial Intelligence Society. And without further ado, Luc, please go ahead.
Thank you, Nathalie. Well, first of all, I would like to say how happy I am to be at this meeting, which is so well organized and in such a happy circumstances, you know. So this is really great. And Ula. Yeah, I'm not very good with technology, that's why. Okay. So when we think about evolution of language, I mean, I've been working on this topic or thinking about this topic for quite a long time. And I should say my first training and my first job was actually in the Department of Linguistics. So, but then I moved on, I went to computer science, you know, did AI, did all sorts of other things which I should not have done in life, and ended up in this Institute for Evolutionary Biology, because I think that we can take ideas and from evolutionary biology to think about evolution of language. Now, if in my lab there in Barcelona, you know, everybody shares the same point of view. So the question is, where does biological complexity come from? And as you know, there was this Linnaean approach based on the idea of a Platonic ideal type with some variation maybe, but basically no evolution. And then Darwin and others also in Paris changed that point of view to a population view, where a species is a population with shared features, but crucially also variation between the individuals in the population. And then you can have evolutionary, stepwise developmental processes that gradually can change a species so that it remains more adapted or evolves into a new species. Now, if you visit my lab in, well, my lab, the institution where I work, you know, everybody is working on certain transitions, biological transitions. For example, you know, you have organisms without lungs, and then you see organisms with lungs. How is this possible? Or you see solitary bees, and then you see collective bees, or unicellular organisms, multicellular organisms. Then you have whole conferences and workshops and groups dedicated just to from unicellular to multicellular organisms. Now, of course, they also think about general principles, and they all follow actually this principle. Well, one of them is selection, but there are many more. There's level formation, for example, or emergent self-organizing behaviors. And so the whole field is structured in this way and very clear. And so my idea is that we should do the same thing to build a kind of evolutionary linguistics. So we ask the question, where does linguistic complexity come from? Now, there's sort of two opinions about this. There's one which we could also call a Cartesian approach. And there's a quote here, and you can guess who wrote that particular quote. You know, saying, languages change, but they do not evolve. We have a conference on language evolution, and languages don't evolve. Well, it is unhelpful to suggest that languages have evolved by biological and non-biological, I suppose is cultural evolution. The latter is not evolution at all. So who could have written that? Yes, you guessed it. So this is very similar to a Linnaean approach in biology. But then you have other people, and I think there are a lot of them here, who say, well, language is a culturally evolving, complex, adaptive system, recruiting available cognitive capacities. For example, for speech production, you know, you recruit the tongue. The tongue is not evolved for saying t, but you recruit this capacity, or you recruit a capacity for hierarchical structure and things like that. With possibly, as Raphael was, you know, saying in his talk, it is possible that there's then what he called biological enculturation happening to give more memory, for example, or faster processing in certain areas. So this is a quote that I wrote a while ago. But it's the second point of view that we have been exploring. Now say, okay, good, but what is this cultural evolution like? Because biology, fantastic theories of biological evolution with mathematics and, you know, modeling, everything. But for language, it's more difficult. So here is a proposal. Well, in evolution, if we take a selectionist point of view, you need both to think about the survival of the fittest, but you also have to think about the arrival of the fittest, right? Now, survival of the fittest, we could say, okay, we have a language community, which is a population of speakers, and each are using a certain set of linguistic traits, we could say. These are possible meanings, meaning form pairs, possible forms, but also strategies for learning and invention of new linguistic elements. And then, of course, when there's an interaction, we use these traits to speak to each other and to understand. But there is variation, okay? Just like in biological organisms, within the same species, you have variation. Now, these traits, they don't replicate in a genetic way, but they replicate through linguistic interaction. So it's a social, I'm not saying anything world-shocking, right? You know all these things. I just put them here because they are the basis of our models. And then certain traits allow speakers and listeners to be more successful in communication, and therefore they have a higher chance of getting reused and replicating again. And the net effect is that you get a language which is adapted to a particular ecological niche, but also adapted to the vocal apparatus, the brain capacities that we have. So this is the survival, and we can model this process, actually, as I will show. Now then, what about the arrival? Now, the arrival, there could be, and there is, in language use, you see variation, you know, errors by speakers, and so on, which may then be picked up by listeners as being the norm for the language. So these errors could actually lead to new things. So this is a kind of like a Darwinian point of view, right? But there's also this Lamarckian point of view, which in evolutionary biology, they're more and more looking at other ways in which variation may arise in populations. And I think if we talk about language, that these other ways that variation occurs or innovation occurs are actually much more important. So I would say it's mostly purposeful. It's a sort of like if there's compaction, for example, for creating morphology, then you know, there's an attempt to optimize actually the amount of stuff that you have to say in order to express something. So now, given this picture, we can go to work. And we can look at various features of language. Of course, we can say, well, what would it take for a population of these agents to start without any language at all and to develop some sort of system of single words? Okay. And then once we have a population of single words, what would have to happen to go from single words to multi-words? Just like you go from unicellular to multicellular organisms. Or you could say we have a population which does not have color terms, and there are populations like that, or very few color terms, to colored categories, color terms. A system, there's a language without determiners, like in Latin, and then you look in Italian and Spanish, Portuguese, and they all have determiners, this transition, and so on. I can keep going. Now, of course, this is what historical linguists have been looking at. And we have a huge amount of data of actually naturally occurring processes in the past, but also today. Now we have incredible records of language use through social media. And we can actually track what's going on social media and see that, in fact, the language is not static at all. It's moving all the time. It's moving very fast. Of course, new words, new categories. Just think about all the concepts for talking about digital technologies. I mean, they're all new and words for that. But also the grammar is changing. Case systems may collapse. A language which doesn't have determiners may now, today, be in the process of evolving determiners. So this idea that there was this magic moment, maybe a genetic mutation, that allowed humans to speak or caused the transition from proto-language to language is just not, I think it's not a good way to think about it. It's an ongoing evolutionary process, just like in biology. So the idea that languages do not evolve denies us the potential for explaining language evolution. Well, if you don't believe in language evolution, you don't have to explain it. But, if you see, if you open your eyes and you see, look at the data, then you cannot deny it. Now, okay, this is fine. So as I said, historical linguistics has provided us with an incredibly rich set of data, which we have to take seriously. But then what we do, we're a bit technology-oriented guys, so we like to make another kind of model, which is agent-based models. And I have to say a little bit what they are, in case you don't know. So the basic idea is that you create artificial agents. They could be in software, so you make a software simulation, or they could actually be real physically embodied agents in the form of robots of some sort. Okay, and now when we build those agents, we give them certain cognitive mechanisms. So you could say these are the things that can be recruited for building language. And it depends on the experiment what we actually give them. And so they are for learning and inventing language, but also for using, okay? Now, these agents, they are members of a population. So we usually have at least two. Well, actually, two is not enough. You need more. Sometimes we do it with 5, but or with 10 or 100 or 1,000. You would say, how do you do this? But we have this kind of system for uploading and downloading, agents into physical bodies, and then we can do experiments with as big a population as we want. The population may be static or dynamic, changing. And then the agents interact with each other. We let them interact. And they have a goal, and they try to achieve the goal, and there's a communication is a sub-goal of the interaction. And then, so we let them go. It's like a soup or a chemical experiment, You put things together, and then you wait, and then suddenly there's an explosion, or things heat up, or you see structure emerging. It's that kind of thing. And you can redo the experiment as much as you want. You can measure everything. And so you measure success in communication, whether there was a lexicon, is it the minimal lexicon, you know, all these kinds of things. So it's a particular scientific method, right, in order to do this kind of research, in order to arrive at very precise models of how these linguistic structures could have emerged. This is a typical example of these kinds of results that we get from these experiments. And, you know, the blue line here is, this is for the emergence of a color lexicon, you know, using an experimental setup, which is a bit like this. And then you see, for example, here we measure, for example, the communicative success. We measure how similar the agents are. We measure the number of color categories they have, and so on. So it's really, it's like in a lab, you know, you create this setup and you let it go. Now, I was not going to show any video clips, but yesterday evening, the person next to me gave me a lot of wine. And then asked me to actually show a video. So I'm going to do that. So this is an example of interaction. Now, this example is about language, about action language. So it's with real robots, and you see when if you do these experiments, particularly with embodied agents, then you also have to worry about perception, about action, about learning, in this case, about the body and about moving the body. So.
That's 3. So, and they're much larger.
Oh, you don't see anything. Okay. This must have been frustrating. Sorry, I have to change a bit the setup here. This is why I didn't want to show this clip. Okay.
So it's encountering itself for the first time.
Oh, sorry. Well, I just showed the language
But
game.
what's even more remarkable about Luc's robots is that once they're able to recognize themselves, they start to evolve their own language and communicate with each other.
So what's going to happen now?
Well, one of them is going to speak, and then he's going to ask the other one to do an action. He is going to invent a word, because he doesn't have yet the word to name that action.
Right.
Okay, so then he says the word, and this one isn't sure what it could mean, right? It's a brand new word. So then he will make a guess, and if the guess is okay, totally by luck,
Right.
well, they both know this word, and they know for the future they can use this word to communicate with each other.
What if it gets it wrong then?
Well, if it gets it wrong, then this one will say that this is not what I had in mind,
Right.
and he will show it.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know which one is going to speak first. Okay, so he's speaking first. He's doing the action. And you notice how he looked?
Okay, so now he's
getting
recording
the real action.
All right.
Okay. So now there's another interaction going to happen. Again, I don't know which one is going to speak. Okay.
Oh, is that the word he just learned?
Yes. So,
okay.
of course, he knows already. So he's doing.
Yeah.
He's doing it.
And he will say yes, will he?
Yeah.
So would they even interact with me to learn this language?
Yeah, we could certainly try it.
Right, okay.
Do you remember any one of the words?
We'll see.
Yeah, okay.
So scary. Oh gosh, it's asked me to do something. Kimatu. It was that, wasn't it? Oh, I got it right. Oh gosh, okay, right, you tell me what Kimatu is. Oh, okay, yeah, that's right. Alright. Tomima. I think that was lifting my right arm. See, did I get it right? Yes. I'm learning robots.
Okay. So that's one interaction. Okay, we go back to the slides. Okay. Right. These Twitter users have to use the reference. Okay, so now I actually want to focus on the topic that I actually wanted to focus on, which is the emergence of hierarchical structure. And of course, this is often seen as the critical transition, you know, from proto-language to language, right? And we have shown in all our experiments we can do emergence of single word utterances grounded in perceptual categories like colors or shapes or body positions. We have done multi-word utterances, but without grammar. So now we're going to think about the next step. And the question is, we want to do agent-based modeling where we would see in a population of these agents that they start to develop, to go from a lexical language to a language with hierarchical structure and recursion. Okay, so we have to worry about what are the selectionist pressures that may push this development, because we're using this evolutionary model. We need to worry about the cognitive mechanisms and about the, particularly also the learning parts. Now, I don't have much time, so I'm going to focus on topic number 1. Now, I should also say the kind of hierarchy that we're going to use. I will use constituent structure because that's familiar to many people. But we've also done experiments, for example, to express hierarchy using an agreement system with morphological markers and so on. So, but I will use that. So hierarchy, I don't need to explain that here, what constituent structure is, but certainly you need lexical categories. We don't put them in. So there's no noun, verb, given. Ordering relations, we don't put that in. Phrasal categories. Then there's within a phrase, there's a head, which is determining many of the properties of the phrase as a whole. We don't say, put that in. There are hierarchical structures. That means one phrase can be part of another phrase. And recursion means that a phrase of a particular type can also be part of a phrase of another type, like noun phrase here, which is a part of this noun phrase. Now, yesterday we had our panel on agent-based modeling with a very great talk by Freek van der Velde, he is showing with lots of data that many people think constituent structure is sort of given, it's innately present. But actually, just like Raphael was showing that quantification or numbers or gestures or temporal expressions are, culturally specific. In this case, we're talking about language specific. This is also the case for constituent structure. So we're dealing also with the process, evolutionary process, that you see constituent structure emerging, like in this case, this is with data for English, where elements floating at the sentence level are incorporated, or new distinctions, new lexical categories are appearing, and so on. So the point I just want to make is, because these are complex experiments, is that hierarchical structure, this is our hypothesis, arises to reduce the combinatorial complexity of semantic interpretation for the listener. Now, there's additional syntactic marking that arises because after a while you get combinatorial complexity in parsing. And so that also needs to be damped. So you need, the whole idea is that grammar is there to reduce complexity, for example, in production, in parsing, so to allow more expressive power. So this is the main point I want to make. And so if we if we look at the lexical language, you could say proto-language if you want. Okay, you have a form, a word like red. You have some meaning. I'm going to represent it like this. This is like a predicate calculus if you want. So you say the color red is, I want to refer to an object, which is here represented with this variable with a question mark, using the fact that the color of that thing is red. And so then if we talk about interpretation, this is all standard in logic and in AI, is to find the object in the world that satisfies this color. So you bind the variable to the index in the world. Okay, so now if we have multi-words, but still a single referent, there's no fundamental problem. We have, for example, red ball or ball red, so this is no grammar whatsoever, just I throw words at you. It's a bit like in Google, you're typing in Google and you think of things that might help to reduce the search, but you don't put in any grammar because you think, rightfully, that the system doesn't understand grammar anyway. Okay, so you look up as a listener, so you look up the word red, you look up the word ball in your lexicon, but it's about a single referent, right? So you know that all these X's are about the same object. So you first look for all the red objects and then the ones that are a ball, or first the balls and then red, you're done. Okay. Now, suppose we make a little change. We just say it can be about more objects, right? So I want the ball and I want the block or something, right? Just that little change. What does that do? Well, I have two words again, red ball or ball red. Red is telling me, is going to refer to an object, and ball, is it the same object or is it a different one? So we get immediately semantic ambiguity, because you can have something red and a ball or a red ball. So in the first case, I have two objects. In the second case, I have one. Now we say, okay, what's the big deal, right? The problem is that if you want to have more words, you run into a combinatorial explosion in semantic interpretation. So if you say, for example, brown, blue, cat, chair, big, no grammar, right, no ordering, well, it can be that there's a cat and then a big blue brown chair, or a brown cat and a big blue chair, etc. And this is only, I'm listing only the ones that assume two objects. But suppose I assume there are 3 or 4 or 5. And then, and I haven't any relations here, but because if you have relations, then who is doing what to whom, right? So you get also this kind of complexity. So how bad it is it? Well, it's really bad. In fact, we can compute it. There's a number which is called the Bell number, which is giving you the size of the search space that you have to go through when you consider in a stupid way all the possible combinations. And this is the formula, and it looks like this. You say, oh, this isn't too bad, but this is logarithmic scale. So in fact, if you have an utterance with 20 words, this generates, I think a mathematician has to read this, 51 billion, whatever, a big number, right? Very big number. And this sentence here has 41 words. So this idea of having a pure lexical language without anything to help you, it can only work, first of all, if you have only a few words, but even there it's growing rapidly. And the second, if you're in the same situation, of course, then it helps a lot. Because if you see a red ball and a green block, you see it and you don't have to worry about, is it now a green ball and a red block, or a red thing and then a block and then a green ball, because you see, right? So if you're situated in the same context, then it is much easier to interpret. But if you have communication like over the telephone where you have to describe, then this is more complicated. And so, so we implemented a language game, which is basically, you know, with situations like this, like a piece of paper is moving away on a table, and then the speaker will want to say something, conceptualizes what to say, is a more complex structure now, then uses a lexical language, and then, you know, the listener also has a lexical language, and then tries to figure out the meaning and point or looks or something like that. Then we immediately get this combinatorial explosion. So what is the solution? Well, if we could, you know, these are the meanings of the different words. You see all these variables. Now, if we could express which variables are co-referential, that means which objects are about the same thing, or which are the roles of objects in event, then we can, you know, we can reduce the complexity. That's the basic message. So if I tell you small and paper hang together, wooden and table are together, you know, and this is the role of these objects, and the one that I want to talk about is the event itself, then you reduce complexity and you can interpret. So then what we try to do is to think up the minimal strategy, the simplest strategy for creating a language that would help in reducing this complexity. And the first strategy you can think is to say, okay, we're going to group all the words that are about the same object together. So it's a grouping strategy. Okay, now this helps. In fact, you could still analytically compute what it will do for you. And you see, this is the scaling. The first is a lexical strategy, which is double exponential. And then the grouping strategy makes it exponential. I say, oh, great. But exponential is still really bad, you know? So this is a step. And so we do these experiments. So then the second that we tried is a bit more sophisticated. It just is saying that if you have a number of words that you put together and used for referring to a particular object, then you make, well, an n-gram out of it. So it's a fixed template that you're going to reuse. It's, again, very simple, you know, but that's what we want to do, right? We want to say, what are the little steps that can help? Now, if you do that, of course, if you do that in a population, then the population has to agree on the word order, because I can imagine that Raphael and Nathalie, they're talking and they say big red block or something, and then there other people are talking and they say red block big, which is another order. And so when Nathalie then talks to, I don't know, David, is there a David? Well, anyway, so David, you know, there's this interaction. So after a while, you get variation in the population, and you need this mechanism that they will converge. But we know that from our earlier experiments, and this is one of the n-gram strategy implemented. You see a kind of winner-take-all when we use the dynamics that we already knew from the naming game and from lexical languages. So this can be done, n-gram strategy. It helps. But of course, you need a huge number of patterns. So there is, again, stress when the complexity of the language, expressive power increases, you're again running against a ceiling. Now, the obvious thing to do is to introduce patterns, because a pattern can be reused to many different situations. So then, okay, I'm not going to go into the technical details how then we do all that, but we basically give these agents a way to create patterns, so they express it, but after doing that, they create a pattern which is more general than that particular instance. And then later on, when they have a similar instance, they reuse the pattern. And so you could see here, if in terms of the pure pattern strategy, and the n-gram strategy before, that you get a drastic reduction into the number of patterns you have to make in order to do it. So then we continue, once you have these patterns, you know, you could still go one step further, which is to consider that a particular pattern start acting as a unit, as a group in itself. And so this is the step from having, for example, the big paper, okay, or big paper, let's say, in a particular order, and you already have slots for the big and the paper, let's say, for the size and the material. But now you make from this whole a unit in itself. Okay, and you, in this case, are the agents when they are building up a language system. They will create that kind of extra step, right? And so this leads to first order, is a first order phrasal strategy. It's not yet hierarchical. It's just about, you know, things which are put together, but they now have well, a categorization on their own, a unit of their own. Again, I have to, if you want to see all the details, you have to go into our papers. But this is an example of an experiment, a multi-agent experiment, with where you see in a population which starts without any grammatical categories or without you know, any patterns at all, how they build up the constructions, how the communicative success rises and is maintained, the reduction in semantic ambiguity and syntactic ambiguity. And then, this is the final output that I want to show. This probably doesn't mean anything to you, and I don't blame you at all. But when we saw these results, we were like, you know, in an orgasmic state, so to speak. So what is happening here is that this is a population of agents again, and this is over time, right? So time in this case means playing of language games. And so we actually have a knob that we can turn with the complexity of the meanings that they have to express. So from A, B, C, D, E to G, right? And so in the beginning, we start with single words and unary predicates. This is what I was showing in the beginning. And you see, this is let me see, where is it on the slide? Well, okay. In the beginning here, they quickly build up, this is very condensed graph here. So they quickly build up a lexicon for talking about, you know, with single words, okay. Then we increase so that they want to express more than one predicate for the same object. So, okay, this is still lexical language, proto-language if you want. So you see the communicative success is dropping because they have to invent new words and agree about new words. And then it increases again because they converge and okay, stable situation. Now then in C, we introduce binary relations like spatial relations. Okay, you see again the communicative success and the alignment also drops down because they have to now deal with relations. So they have to invent something like case grammar, if you want. And then it moves up again, and okay. So in D, we add more than one predicate for describing objects and binary relations. So again, you know, but they can handle this. You see, there's no big drop anymore in their success. Then we increase to two binary relations, so something like Hassan wants Michael to eat cheese, you know? So you have two binary relations in them, and you see that there's this is in E, so you have a drop again, and then coming back up because these agents are inventing ways to deal with that. But then when we start moving up and up, you see in F and in G, we don't need any more, even though we increase the complexity of the semantic structures that they have to express, there's no drop anymore in communicative success or in alignment, because with the constructions they had, they were able to deal with it. And so these constructions, if you look at the examples, like Jane suggests that Michael asks Pia to go for a walk, or the box on the table in the kitchen of Villa Jaffe. You recognize this example. So this is really hierarchical, but it is also recursive. So, and actually, very interesting is that we did not have to add any additional cognitive complexity in order to go from the hierarchical system to the recursive system. In fact, at the technical level, it depends a little bit on the architecture of what you're using, but it's not like a big switch, actually. If you're interested, I could explain this into more detail to anyone who wants to have an explanation. So I'm going to conclude because I have 1 minute left. I should say that we not only investigated in this way constituent structure, but there's also a couple of papers on where we tried to use other strategies for expressing hierarchy, in particular agreement and marking, grammatical marking, and then using agreement markers. So this, for example, in this plus one. Okay, conclusion. So this, in evolutionary linguistics, we try to understand how linguistic structure arises through process of cultural evolution, basically. And now, if you say, okay, what does this mean biologically? Then I would say, well, you recruit existing mechanisms, existing cognitive mechanisms to do the job. But then, of course, there could be a process to enhance your, let's say, neural capacities in order to do a better job. So it's not that first you have the mutation and then comes the language. It's rather that you struggle, maybe, or you can go to a certain depth in your hierarchical structure, but if you want more complex structures, you will need more memory. So you need more brain cells. But in principle, the principles are there with what you have already available. Then I hope I have shown, at least given a little taste, how with agent-based models we can do really precise experiments and test out these hypotheses. And, well, there are lots of results, but I think, much remains to be done. There's a whole minefield, I mean mine here in terms of gold mine, of topics that, fantastic topics to do these experiments, although I have to warn you that each of these experiments takes quite a long time, and also technological sophistication to do them. Okay, that's it.